Now that woke insanity has fully permeated American society, things have gotten very unfair for one group, white people. Of course, this is unacceptable, especially considering that whites, Europeans, Irish, Scottish, etc., were the ones who built this nation and brought it to where it is today. Yet now, they are at the receiving end of an unprecedented campaign of victimization. They have been made the scapegoats for all manner of social ills, and the most egregious thing is that people of other races have conveniently taken credit for anything good that happens in society, as if whites have had nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, whenever something bad happens, whites are always to blame. To hear the typical liberal tell it, it seems like white people have invented racism and are actively engaged in its practice, whereas other races are its helpless victims. If this sounds absurd to you, that's because it is. But the sad truth is that many Americans buy right into this nonsense. Otherwise, how else would you explain the proliferation of anti-white racism that has infected our nation? Here are 5 reasons why people hate white people. 1. Envy and resentment. At least for some members of other races, the hatred for white people is rooted in envy and resentment over perceived advantages that white people have. In America, this typically takes the form of allegations of white privilege, the idea that white people benefit from unearned advantages in life simply because they are white. White privilege is often characterized as a form of systemic racism, in which white people benefit from the actions of white people who came before them. For instance, white people might benefit from the slavery of black people hundreds of years ago, or from the oppression of indigenous populations that occurred during the colonization of the United States. There is no denying that in the past, white people did benefit from slavery and colonialism. However, claiming that white people still benefit from these practices today is simply untrue. Not only is it false, but it's also a dangerous and harmful stereotype that perpetuates anti-white racism. Let's consider the following. Most white Americans had nothing to do with slavery or colonialism. Those things happened many generations ago, and most white Americans weren't alive then. Moreover, the vast majority of white Americans are not wealthy or powerful. In fact, many are struggling to make ends meet. To suggest that they benefit from slavery or colonialism is not only ignorant, but also offensive. It ignores the hard work and sacrifices that many white Americans make every day to improve their lives and the lives of their families. Furthermore, it reinforces negative stereotypes about white people and contributes to a climate of anti-white racism. In reality, white people face their own set of challenges and discrimination, and suggesting that they benefit from the oppression of others is not only inaccurate, but also undermines the struggles of those who are truly disadvantaged. Instead of perpetuating harmful stereotypes, we should focus on creating a more equitable society for all people, regardless of their race or background. And if we're talking about privilege, let's not forget that most of the world is white. More than 6 billion people worldwide identify themselves as white, so if white people really did have so much privilege, you'd think they'd be more widely hated across the world, not just here in America. So whatever advantage white people do have in America isn't exactly translating into global privilege. The reality is that the hatred for white people is rooted in ignorance, resentment, and a lack of understanding. Instead of perpetuating these harmful stereotypes, we should strive to create a more inclusive and equitable society for all. Let's move on to 2. Identity politics. Ever since the advent of black identity politics in the 1960s, white people have been cast in the role of the oppressor. This is unfortunate because it paints an inaccurate and overly simplistic picture of the complexities of race relations in America. It suggests that all white people are inherently racist and that all black people are inherently victims of racism. This narrative is not only false, but also counterproductive. By portraying all white people as racists, black identity politics creates a climate of hostility and mistrust between racial groups. It makes it difficult for individuals to connect with each other on a human level and perpetuates harmful stereotypes. Furthermore, by portraying all black people as victims of racism, black identity politics fails to recognize the agency and resilience of black Americans. It reduces black people to a single dimension and denies them the opportunity to be seen as complex individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. This can lead to a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness, which is not conducive to positive social change. Instead of fostering understanding and empathy, black identity politics often creates division and resentment. By perpetuating these harmful stereotypes, Black identity politics undermines the goal of achieving racial equality and justice. It creates a cycle of anger and bitterness that can be difficult to break. Instead, we should strive to create a society that values diversity, celebrates the contributions of all racial groups, and promotes equal opportunities for all people. 3. Low self-esteem. Some members of other races harbor an intense hatred for white people simply because they suffer from low self-esteem and seek to compensate for it by putting others down. In other words, they're driven by insecurity. And there's no better target than the most successful racial group in history. In fact, it's hardly controversial to say that white people have done more to advance civilization than all other races combined. Yet non-white people seem to forget this when they embark on campaigns to denigrate and defame white people. Such behavior reveals a fundamental lack of self-confidence and self-respect. It's as if non-white people are saying, "I am inferior to white people, and I will prove it by spreading hateful propaganda about them." But their efforts to denigrate white people ultimately serve to highlight their own insecurities. After all, why would someone feel the need to put others down unless they felt inadequate themselves? Therefore, the hatred of white people by some non-white people is often a sign of low self-esteem rather than genuine animosity towards white people. These individuals are not genuinely concerned with social justice or equality. Rather, they are motivated by their own insecurities and desire to feel superior to someone else. 4. Misplaced guilt. Many people feel guilty about their race or their ancestors' actions. This is particularly true of white Americans whose ancestors benefited from slavery or colonialism. Now, while it's commendable to acknowledge the sins of one's ancestors, it's also important to remember that they are just that, sins of the past. It's not fair nor just to hold present-day white people accountable for the actions of their ancestors. Doing so is a form of collective punishment which is morally repugnant. What's more, it's also counterproductive. By constantly dwelling on the sins of the past, we distract ourselves from addressing the real issues that we face today. We allow ourselves to be consumed by guilt and shame, which prevents us from working towards a better future. Instead of allowing ourselves to be paralyzed by guilt, we should focus on the present and future and work towards creating a better world for everyone. We can learn from the mistakes of the past, but we must not allow them to define us or limit our potential. Ultimately, we must remember that we are not our ancestors. We are the ones responsible for shaping our own destiny. And if we want to create a better future, we must do so on our own terms. 5. Mass immigration. The sudden surge of anti-white racism in America coincides almost exactly with the onset of mass unskilled immigration from non-white countries. All of a sudden, there's a lot more people of color in America than there used to be, and many of them have radically different views on race and culture than the white population. It didn't take long for these views to take root in American society and start influencing mainstream institutions such as schools, corporations, and the media. As a result, our entire culture has shifted dramatically in recent years. Today, critical race theory, which posits that white people are inherently evil, is taught in many classrooms. Companies routinely discriminate against white people in hiring and promotions, and mainstream media outlets churn out anti-white propaganda on a daily basis. Now, it would be naive to suggest that this shift in attitudes and institutions is entirely due to mass immigration. Clearly, we've been trending in this direction for several decades, but mass immigration has undoubtedly accelerated this process and given it a strong foothold in American life. Unfortunately, there's little that can be done to reverse this trend at this point. Even if we stopped all immigration tomorrow, it would still take decades for the effects to wear off. And there's no guarantee that it would even come to that. Depending on the trajectory of current events, things could easily get worse before they get better. But this shouldn't discourage us from trying to improve the situation. We should push back against the anti-white racism that is infecting our society, and make sure that it doesn't become the new normal. The hatred of white people is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. While it's important to recognize the progress that has been made in achieving racial equality, we must also acknowledge the challenges that remain. By understanding the roots of this hatred, we can work towards creating a more tolerant and inclusive society. We must reject prejudice and discrimination in all its forms, and celebrate the diversity that makes our society so rich. Only then can we truly create a nation that is united and just for all. Thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to leave any comments you may have. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help my channel grow.